Well, good evening and a very warm welcome, as always, to the Open Door Show from Property CEO. My name is Richard Clapson, and I'm here well, not always, mostly I'm here with the other half, unless he's off fishing, with the other half, Mr. Ian Child. It's great to have you here, and over the next 45 minutes, well, as always, we take a deep dive into the world of property. A little bit different tonight, though, isn't that right, Ian? We've got a good packed schedule.
We've got a packed schedule this evening, yeah. So we're going to be covering some of the latest news items, talking, as everyone opened doors to some of the movers and shakers out there who give us a bit of an inside track on what's happening in the world of property in general, and also shining a bit of a spotlight on some of the areas where we think there might be a good opportunity for people to look at in the world of property development.
That's right. Now, we always say on this show, above all, we're here to try and have a bit of fun doing it. We've got an interesting subject tonight, which isn't all fun, but we do our best to have a bit of fun and enjoy the 45 minutes you're going to spend with us. Because, I mean, life is far too short not to. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world at the moment, which is pretty sad. But we'll endeavour, as always, to keep you upbeat and make sure you enjoy the next 45 minutes. But, of course, you need to join in. It is going to be a question and answer show, although we're going to do a bit more talking than normal this evening, or talking at you, because that's what we've been asked to do. And of course, we will have some time for questions, so put them in the chat box and we will do our best. So, Ian, a little bit of a change, but what's coming up this evening?
Well, yeah, a bit of a change to our advertised programme. So we're going to be talking about how the tragic events that are unfolding in Ukraine at the moment over the last couple of weeks, how they've impacted the housing market, or how they potentially might impact the housing market. So we're looking at things like house prices and what's going to be happening there, but also obviously looking at property development as well, and seeing speculating about some of the things that could be factors in the world of property development as a result of what's happening in Central Europe.
Good stuff. Well, no, it's good to have you here. Let's see who is on this evening. Well, Sadie's on, Emily's on, Will's on. I can't read all these out, by the way. Someone messaged me today and said, "Oh, I was on Open Door. You never read my name out."
No.
If we just read all the names out, we'd be here for 10, 15 minutes. Ricky's on, Ursula's on, Roman's on, good evening, Patrick's on, Deirdre's on, Jenny's on, Jenny and Roman, maybe Kim's on, Yvette's on, Dell's on, Damien's on, hello there. I'm going to read as many as I can. Dan's on, Paldeep's on, Dell's on, Bob's on, James is on, Jonathan's on, Jane and Nick are both on, Nadia, Karen and Sarah, and many, many more of you on. Give us a quick wave, give us a hands up if you can see and hear us. Give us a quick wave. Good. Just I thought, Ian, I could be reading out all those names. We could have started and no one could hear us. Imagine that. Imagine that.
No, all here. That's good.
Jenny Roman says, "Hi guys, Roman and Jenny here." Oh, great. That's good then. And Damien says, "Evening guys, great to see you both." Damien, great to see you. Well, we can imagine that you're there out there. Okay, so we can't quite see you, obviously. Dan says, "Evening, gents." And Jonathan says, "Good to be here again. Thanks for an excellent 3-day workshop a couple of weeks ago." Ah, Jonathan, absolutely. Well, Jonathan's been on one of our 3-day workshops. It's excellent. So there you go. If you want a recommendation, there it is. Sarah says, "Great to be here this evening. Looking forward to tonight's show. Interesting topic. Glad you're covering it and interested to hear what you're going to say." Gary says, "Good evening." Josh says, "Hello." Hello, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
And we've got some news items. As always, we try and pick up a few news items. Ian, have you got a few news items to
I've
throw in?
got a smattering of news. Let me do the whole, yeah, here we go. There's the news. So first one from Michael Gove. He has apparently told Tory MPs that the standalone planning bill has been scrapped. So you may remember that one of the previous housing secretaries introduced a new planning bill. Didn't go down particularly well, specifically around this whole concept of creating kind of growth areas, which was seen as a bit of a free-for-all for developers to go out and kind of build whatever they liked. Apparently not a vote winner. So the housing secretary got the heave-ho. Gove came in, and he was originally saying we were going to get this revised planning bill sort of in the spring. It looks like that's not going to happen. It looks like what he's doing is tidying up the planning system, because it's a little untidy at the moment, and he's going to use levelling up legislation to do it. So we can expect apparently that to come in, he says, in the Queen's speech in the spring. But apparently he did tell the meeting of MPs that the growth zones are now definitely not going to happen. So there we go. All change as ever in the world of planning, but no answers as yet. Some news, not particularly good news for landlords in London. Sadiq Khan, the mayor, wants to freeze rents for a couple of years because he feels that that's going to save tenants about £3,000 on average for that period. Obviously, that's then effectively going to be absorbed by landlords. But of course, there's quite a few other things going on in the world of landlords in London and elsewhere. So basically bringing homes up to scratch and the energy efficiency upgrades. And they've basically added that little lot up and reckon that it's about 15,000 overall. So quite a lot going on in London. Who knows whether that's going to then extend outside the capital. And the final piece of news is about some very sad news, actually, about the MP Stuart Andrew, who's the latest housing minister. Last time I looked, he was still the housing minister, so it's, I think, the 11th one in 10 years. He popped into the Red Lion, apparently, after work for a quick one, and put his briefcase down, and then discovered moments later that it had been stolen. So the housing minister not off to an amazing start. Actually, I hadn't put two and two together. Maybe that's why Gove has delayed the whole planning thing. Perhaps that was in the briefcase. But I do remember, actually, it'd probably be about 10 years ago that David Cameron left his daughter in a pub. So it's yeah, obviously Tory's good at leaving things in pubs.
I actually lost one of a laptop of mine and my bag and everything, my office keys, in a pub in London, and we're all stood around a little poser table, and my bag was right by my feet, and then when I went to go, it had gone. They'd taken it, it had gone, and I was suggested that I ought to go back to my office and get the locks changed. So I thought, oh no, surely not, and I did it, and I went back to the office just in Borough, just around the back of Borough Market, and yeah, blow me, waiting for the locksmith, and yeah, they actually this bunch of sort of thuggish looking people turned up in a car. Obviously Scarpa, once they saw me, because obviously, you know, they wouldn't mess with me, do they?
No.
Anyway, that aside, look, for those of you that's just tuned in, and we're hoping to get a whole load of information about getting paid to develop property, which was going to be the subject this evening. We've delayed that for a couple of weeks. Next week we've got a guest. We'll tell you about that a little bit later. But we've actually delayed it and brought a different subject on board. Why is that? What's happened? Well, most of you will know out there. I can see there's a lot of our students on this evening. A lot of people. In fact, who's new? Give us a hands up if you're new, brand new to the show this evening. Give us a wave. Yeah, quite a few of you. Good. Well, look, you're welcome. Welcome here. And for those that are returning, and for those that are regulars, you're all welcome. So a lot of you will know that we actually run a training company. We train property developers, and this morning we had a live Q&A with our students, and I can see some of them are actually on here this evening. And there was a question that was asked, and it was asked about what do we think about the situation in Ukraine? What does it mean for property developers? So we had an interesting discussion and debate on that this morning. And then, not necessarily expected, but we then got several emails from other people that have been on the Q&A this morning and said, like to talk a bit more about that, really interesting. And then purely by coincidence, someone had actually emailed in, I think it was definitely one, might have been a couple, to our team, and said one of the subjects they'd like us to do on Open Door was talk about the situation in Ukraine and its effect on the property market. So we thought, well, let's do that. We've got a guest next week, so we didn't want to alter that. And we thought, well, actually, let's bring this topic in, which is really what we talked about this morning. And you know, there are huge problems that's going on over in Ukraine. Whatever your views or positioning on that is, it's sad, because there's obviously a huge amount of people that are suffering immensely. And you know, we can't, you know, we can try and do things about that. We can only do so much, unfortunately, ourselves, and hopefully the governments around the world are trying to do what they can. Hopefully at some point it'll settle down, someone will see sense, and people will start talking, and the fighting will stop. Fingers crossed, touch wood, I've got a wooden table here, that will happen. But the question that we were asked, and we thought it was an interesting one, and a few people want to chat a little bit more about it. You know, what does that mean? What does that mean for the UK property market and developers? But I think there's a wider question. Well, what does that mean for business? So we thought we'd bring that up as a subject tonight. And I think the first thing, there's a few things to talk about. One is really what's going to happen in the property market. Is there any implications? And then drilling it down, what does that mean for developers? So Ian, do you want to start? And guys, we're going to take a bit of time on this, but any questions you've got, throw them in the chat box and we'll pick them up. And any other property questions, we'll have time to answer some other questions tonight. But we'll spend a bit of time on this because I think this is a really important subject. Ian, what's your initial thoughts, perhaps, if you could pick up what you think will happen in the property market?
So the market specifically, so leaving kind of development specifically to one side for a second, I think well, obvious, it's going to be difficult to be definitive. Does depend a lot on how long the kind of conflict goes on in Ukraine, how long it lasts, and how kind of broad it is. We've got quite a lot of things going on in the background. So we've got inflation is, I think, the highest figure now it's been since about 1992, so up at about 5.5%. Bank of England obviously been putting up interest rates to kind of curb inflation. Don't think we're likely to see massive hikes in interest rates. Banks tend to be pretty risk averse when it comes to that. So I think it's going to go up, but it's not going to be kind of stellar growth rates in terms of interest rates going up. But we are going to see, I think, mortgage lenders start to pull some of their more attractive, their best kind of products out of the market, certainly in the short term. What's likely to happen then as a result of those things is you've got quite a few things that are going to be sort of putting downward pressure on house prices. So house prices have been running away for a number of different reasons recently. So I think 2021 it was about 10.8% annual increase in house prices. The downward pressure, we've got cost of living going up, so then people's affordability decreases. People have just simply got less cash to be able to put into property. Certainly, we're hearing a lot about energy prices. Remains to be seen how governments may be able to sort of stabilise that in the slightly longer term, but certainly we're in the short term, it sounds like we're going to be on the receiving end of some pretty sharp energy price hikes. And of course, we've got this underlying inflation, as I said. So lots of pressures that are just going to be affecting people's affordability in terms of being able to move into the up the housing ladder or onto the housing ladder. I think all of those things combined do a number of things. Affordability aside, I think that uncertainty gives people, it's a deterrent for some people kind of moving onto the market. And a rise in interest rates definitely could, people are going to be concerned about what's going to happen to interest rates. Those people that perhaps have secured fixed rates in the fairly recent period, maybe in the last few months have done well to kind of get in. Then it's likely that some of the deals going forward aren't going to be quite so good. And I think there's just that underlying kind of sentiment that people, because they don't like uncertainty, they tend to pause some of their bigger kind of life decisions. And of course, moving house is one of those things. So lots of things in the news at the moment that are kind of sort of putting a bit of doom and gloom on what's going to be happening to the housing market, and certainly a change to some of the growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. I think the big issue that often gets overlooked, though, when people look at what those downward pressures are, is just the underlying imbalance between the number of the supply and demand. So there's this whole list of things that are going to be driving down these downward pressures on house prices. But I read a report today which said that there were 30 buyers for every available property on the market at the moment, with about nearly 40%, so 2 in 5 houses are being sold for more than the asking price. So there is still this massive demand that sits out there. Lots of people haven't been able to move who want to move because there just hasn't been the supply. There's also quite a lot of people that are migrating in estate agent terms, so they're going quite often out of cities, and then they're basically moving out into areas where the house values, they can get more for their money. So some of those people are bringing with them greater budgets to be able to move up the housing ladder. So it isn't going to be all about affordability driving down the housing market. I think what we're going to see is that the growth won't be anything like as strong as it has been, and it may fall back a little, but ultimately there's some real pressure there in terms of supply versus demand that is going to keep keep the market relatively stable. And I guess as events move on in Ukraine, and we get to a point where perhaps there's greater clarity and, dare I say, a little less shock that we've had over the last couple of weeks, and things perhaps get to a more an even keel, then that some of that sentiment changes, and people become more thoughtful about sort of engaging back in the market again. But yeah, certainly I think house prices in over this next period, certainly for the rest of this year, not likely to fall off a cliff. I hope that's not famous last words, but I do think there's so much pressure underlying some of the that sort of upward pressure underlying some of those other factors, that we're likely to see house prices stay reasonably on an even keel.
I think, Ian, that's interesting, the point that you make there about this huge demand that we've just not satisfied in this country, and that's not going to go away for some time. So, you know, from a development point of view, that's good. But let's just understand what it means for developers. And I think, first of all, let's think about businesses for a minute, okay? Because this affects all businesses. Any situation does. Lots of businesses are being impacted by what's happening, and particularly those businesses, you know, that are impacted by sanctions, or businesses that do business with those companies that are being impacted. So there's lots of things going on out there. They're much wider than property, where businesses are having an effect on this particular situation that's going on. And of course, lots of situations that happen in and around the world. And it's important, I guess, that any business owner understands the extent to which their business might be disrupted. So I remember, you know, one of my first businesses that I had, one of my guys actually did a disaster plan. You know, what would happen if? We had all these scenarios, which frankly looked a bit ludicrous, but we actually had disaster plans. And I mean, I look back then and I think, yeah, what a great foresight we had on that business. And these were particularly in the days when you couldn't just go down to PC World and buy a computer, but we had backup plans and computers stored and all sorts of things, and drawing boards and those sorts of things in those days. So I think all businesses have to have an understanding of that. And I think then, you know, any disruption, it does create winners and losers. And this is not people preying on people, but it's about winners and losers, and it's about trying to position yourself, your business. And I know a lot of you are property people. Some of you I know that join the show are not property people, but maybe looking over the edge, thinking about getting into property. But I guess in any business, the winners are often the ones that have a plan and take action. And it is like that disaster recovery plan. It's having a plan, but taking action. It's not sitting on the fence, it's getting on with stuff. And I think if we have a look at developers and the impact, and thank you, I see various questions coming in. We'll try and pick, there's quite a few questions coming in. We'll try and pick as many as we can up in a bit. But I think in terms of impacts for developers, okay, and there's always, I say, pluses and minuses on this, but uncertainty always breeds some inaction in many people. There's a lot of people that just won't do anything. So in lots of ways, that leads to less competition in the market. So those that are going to take action have got more opportunity, you know, because there will be lots of people that just don't do things. This does apply to all sorts of businesses, but if we just home it in a little bit on property, I mean, the impact of the sanctions is likely to mean more businesses having to adjust, you know, or they may even fail. Sad as that is, I mean, it's not as sad as what else is going on in Ukraine, but as sad as that is, and that is tough because that does affect people's lives. So we can't say, oh, just because that's not as bad as that. You know, we know that it affects people. So there will be people that businesses will struggle. And I mean, that does mean, because we're trying to discuss and debate about development, it does mean that more commercial properties are probably going to come onto the market, which, if you're a developer, can only be a good thing. And in a good thing, you know, and when I say winners and losers, if someone has got a business that's failing and they need to get rid of their property, well, if you're a developer or you're going to become a developer, you're solving their problem. I mean, I never advocate going out and stitching someone up or taking advantage. Pay a fair and reasonable price, but it's going to be a competitive price because that's what the market is. And if you're one of the only people buying, you're going to get it at a sensible price. You know, don't screw someone over because it's never good for your own self-worth and that. But that, you know, you're both winners then, because someone's got out of that situation. You've got something in a bargain. So I think that's a definite advantage in terms of those properties coming in. And as we talked about the 300,000 houses, you know, they've got to be built. That underlying demand for homes hasn't changed, as Ian's pointed out. And if we try and visualize, what does 300,000 houses look like? I mean, count them up your street. I mean, I know there's not many where I live, but you know, how many have you got in your street? Maybe a few, maybe not many. but it's a lot. And I think 300,000 is probably more than the total number of households in Oxfordshire alone. And just picture that. It's equivalent probably to a new county's worth of houses being built every year. That's getting it in perspective. If you're entering a market where we're talking about whatever you're going to do in terms of supply, is there someone who wants to buy it? The demand is huge. Okay, demand is huge. Getting something at a cheaper price fairly then obviously does help, because you often make your money when you buy right. That's where you can make your profit. And I think it's about 1 million homes could be created from brownfield sites. They're not sites for Barratt's or Persimmon. That is for small scale property developers. This is where permitted development rights come in. Okay, this is where SME developers, people like you out there that's developing, a lot of our students, so it has been a big concern for our students and people that are talking to us about getting onto this journey. But it shouldn't be, because those opportunities, those buildings are there. Okay, and they're not going to be developed by, as I say, the larger national players. And so whatever the events in the world, demand for homes is still going to be extremely strong. And I know there's lots of rhetoric around about whether this will go bigger, and opinion. I don't think it will. I think the world has too much to lose. I think there's a lot of very sensible people trying to take very sensible positions and do as much as they can to help, but without crossing a line. And I'm pleased I'm not going to make those decisions myself. And I applaud people that are taking that pressure and making those decisions. It's probably a tough line to follow, but I think what we have as nuclear deterrents around this world is deterrence, and that should be what they're for. So one rather hopes that this situation in itself is contained. So in a way, that demand is always going to be strong. That position is always going to be there. And particularly, I think when you think about development, we always say, don't we, 18 to 24 months, we say, to develop. Okay. And if you think about that, I mean, let's hope and pray that 2 years is a different place. Rather hope it is in 2 months, in 2 weeks, 2 days would be great. Or I think it's not going to be 2 days, unfortunately. But one would rather hope in 2 years that people have seen sense, however they do, and people have pulled together, and the fighting stops, and the differences are resolved in whatever ways they've got to be resolved, whatever their views are, and whoever's got a claim on this or whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, but let's hope they stop that fighting. And on that basis, if you think about it, if you started to develop now and you're going to put it in the market 18 to 24 months, and you're buying it at a set fair and sensible price now because you've had an opportunity and you've helped someone else out, well, that's great. That's great that hopefully that situation is whether it's resolved, but hopefully it's far less volatile. So think about that timing. I think when you're thinking about developers, a lot of people panic. It's like, oh, what about now? Well, you're not going to sell it now. And that was the same for COVID and Brexit for a lot of people. Okay. And I guess there's never been a perfect time. There's never a perfect time to do anything in any business. Before Ukraine, as I said, we had we had COVID, but of course we had cost of materials that's still kicking around. Cost of materials, COVID, Brexit. I mean, I'm not old enough and my memory's not that good to go back further, but we've always had stuff. We've always had ups and downs. There's always reasons not to do something. Okay. And I think, you've got to then go, well, what are the reasons to do something? I think that's important if you want to. Okay. If you want to. I guess in terms of, what does it mean to you? And this is a question you can answer yourself. Why are you getting into development? Why are you perhaps thinking about development? Why are you just intrigued about development? And we can talk about development, but I guess it's any business. Okay. And when there's uncertainty, as I said, with a business, you have to have a plan. What is your plan? And those people, that are really concerned, is probably because they don't have a plan, or their plan is just not sufficient to get them sorted. And I know some property developers who this really doesn't affect them, and it's sort of. And we had a chat. I can't remember whether it was on the Q&A this morning, but we were having a chat about it today. If my biggest problem is fuel costs are going to go up in the car, and I've got to pay a bit more for heating and a bit more for my food, I'm happy to take that on board, because those poor souls over there are taking a lot more on board. I can say that probably because I can afford that. I totally appreciate there's lots of people in this country that cannot afford energy bill prices, and we'll have similar situations there. But let's just hone this down. In terms of property developers, that's why they're in a great place, because it's a highly leveraged model which generates chunks of cash. So if you're sat there now, and I know some of you will be, with 100, 200,000 pounds sat in the bank, maybe you can do things for other people. Maybe you can spend your time, not fretting about how you're going to pay your bills, because you've got those bits of cash. So I think, wherever there are concerns like future job security, pension provisions, cost of living, as I say, then having a game plan that creates cash is always going to give you a lot of options. And that's what we want, is options. Okay, it's always options. And that reduces your dependency on other income and allows you to absorb more financial pain. And as I say, that's the least that we can take on board, isn't it? If we've just got to take a bit of financial pain, that's nothing compared to what other people are doing. And in time, one hopes things will settle down or equilibrium and so on. So I think we'll take some questions in a minute, there's lots of stuff piling in, but I think, when we think about this situation, is what we chatted around this morning, and it's a really interesting subject, and I'm glad you asked about it. We can't belittle what's going on. Everyone will have their own views on what's right or what's wrong. I mean, certainly what is wrong is people, running around attacking each other. That's wrong in just any modern society. How they resolve it, I don't know, but only hope that they will, and sooner rather than later. But I think, bringing it back, and the question of the property market, and you have to look after yourselves, because if you look after yourselves, you can help other people. That term about putting your oxygen mask on. And to be honest, if you're sat there with £500,000 in the bank, you probably donate some to some charity. So, what's not to like about that? So I think this underlying thing, if you're worried about the journey you're on, and you've got developments going, or you're about to get into development, whatever, I wouldn't. Okay. In a way, it's a red herring. That what the news is like. They talk all this stuff up. Underlying fact, there's a massive shortage of houses in this country, a whole county every year. And, in terms of any market that's disruptive, that's when there's opportunity. And of course, a lot of people will sit on the fence. If you don't, and you carry on, and you've got a plan, then, you're likely to get through this. You're likely to work, and particularly because you're delivering in 18 to 24 months from where you are today. Okay, probably at least 12 months, whatever anyone else is doing. And the bottom line I'd encourage most people to think about, whether it's property or whatever business it's in, think about that game plan that you have. We always say, you're in it now, think about next time, because there will be another next time. It's like Brexit, and there's another next time, it's called COVID. There's another next time, unfortunately, it's called Ukraine. They're all pretty bad things, Unfortunately, Brexit was the easiest thing. But there's always a next time, and as sad as it is, and hopefully it's not as bad as the Ukraine or COVID situation, there will be another next time. And that, I think, is the underlying thing here, is know your plan, know your strategy, make sure that you've got yourself and your family protected. When you do that, you can help others. There we go. Interesting subject, tough subject. We don't want to take the fun out of Property CEO and Open Door. So we'll have a few questions. There's a lot of questions coming in. I see there's some questions on tonight's subject, so we'll pick up a few of them, and we'll also pick up, I can see just scanning down, scrolling, there's a good few property questions in as well, so we'll lighten the mood a bit with some property questions, but let's pick up a few in relation to what we've talked about this evening. Ian, have you got something to kick off with?
Yeah, I've got one here from Emily. Good evening, Emily, who asks, do you think that getting funding will become more difficult in these current times? Interesting question. I think broadly, no. So there's different types of funding. Obviously, I mentioned earlier about what's potentially going to be happening to mortgage rates, and there's going to obviously be a potential sort of angle there for property investors. I think in terms from a property development perspective, there is a lot of money in the market in terms of both private investors and commercial lenders as well. So certainly there's still that appetite, simply because the opportunity for getting great returns on your money, on your savings, and on the investment capital that the commercial lenders hold is few and far between. The bank still isn't paying very much interest, even though the rate of interest has gone up. So there is still a lot of opportunity, and of course property particularly in uncertain times, property development and property generally is seen as a relatively safe haven in terms of the whole bricks and mortar thing. So I think in broad terms, then on the development side, I think there's still going to be a very significant appetite to invest, simply because there's so much money out there that doesn't have a home that would be able to generate the level of returns that you can get from property development. So I still think there's going to be lots of money around. Hope that helps, Emily.
Good stuff. Okay, just a couple of statements. I'm just picking these couple of things out. Nadia says, thank you guys for tonight's thoughts, very informative. Nadia, you are welcome. And interesting comment from George. Great talk tonight. This show is always great value. Thanks. I would add that I have been in business and property now for over 30 years. Blimey, George could be older than me. And there is always a reason not to do something and wait and see how things pan out. For me, my success has come from taking considered action when others will not. This situation in Ukraine is terrible, but sort yourself out and then you can help others. George, thank you. Nice, good words. Hopefully encouraging in words for some people. Okay, let me pick up this one then in terms of a little bit more specific. There's a couple of questions in and around this, so I'm just going to pick this up generally. Dale's asked this one, so just picking up yours, Dale, but I know several other people have asked about cost of materials. Other than the UK getting involved on the ground in Ukraine, do you think COVID pushing up material and labour prices in new builds being more dangerous in the long-term growth? There's a few questions about material prices and what's going on. Look, inevitably, material price. There's genuine reasons, and there's often just a fabricated reason. If I'm going to be slightly cynical, oh, let's put material prices up. They'll have to take the pay, and people do that. It's a bit like some of the petrol prices. Well, why are certain prices going up suddenly to 173 or whatever, and some are at 157? It's because they're on the motorway, and then they've got you as a captive audience, and that's where you have to fill up. That's it's taking the mick a bit, but that's okay. Supply and demand, I guess that's what it is. Some of that, I think, will filter through in terms of material prices. I think the thing with material prices is material prices have always been up and down in this country. Labour shortages have always been up and down. Someone was saying, oh, cost of a decorator is a fortune these days. You better be a decorator than you are going to be a lawyer. Sure, but look, it goes up and down, always goes up and down. And certainly in the years I've been in, it's never changed. Yes, there's some issues at the moment, material prices, and we don't quite know what's going to happen about it. So in terms of it being dangerous, I think that's about you controlling your costs. We always talk, and when we train people, and I know not everyone here has been trained by us, but when we talk about development, okay, and I noticed a couple of comments people talked about. I thought we were going to talk about property in general. We have as such, because I think that is there, whether you're doing rentals or whatever, the same, a lot of the underlying things we talked about are there. Largely as a business, we talk about property development because that's what we know, okay? So, but I think in terms of the material prices and property development, so I just thought I'd add that in. If you actually analyze your deals properly, and we always say minimum of 20% profit on gross development value, when you have uncertainty, then you've got to build in more. Okay, you're going to go, man, it's tough enough to find a deal with 20%. Sure, work a bit harder then, okay, because you've got to try and build a bit more in. And then you've got to really be genuine with your figures, because then if you start to stress test your deal, you work out how much is the material price. Well, the material prices themselves are probably half of the overall construction cost, at most, okay, and they're not all materials are going to go up. But if you start stress testing your deal, you can see what you'd need as a percentage to make the thing work, so you don't actually lose money. And you've got to build a bit of that in. You've got to build some of that in terms of your offer price for the building you're going to buy, and that is supply and demand. And of course, it's ultimately going to be built into the sale value. So I don't really worry about these things ultimately, because if material prices go up across the board, well, we've all got to pay the same as developers, which means ultimately we've got to pass that on. And that's just all the fuel companies say. I mean, they're pretty quick at passing it on, aren't they? Literally. I mean, you can think, hang on a minute, the stuff you got in the tanks, you bought at so many a barrel. Now suddenly it's gone up. That's funny, that, isn't it? But it doesn't come down as quick either, does it? But what I'm saying is, you've got to build this stuff in. You've always got to think about it. Have a good, robust analysis. Be very careful. yes, you've got to take it into account. You can't ignore it, but it's not a reason, because it never has been a reason to stop. Well, it has for lots of people, but those that are serious about this, it's not a reason to sit on the fence and not develop. As you know, as George was saying, take considered action when others will not. That's his words. Take considered action when others will not. And that's what it's got to be considered. So yes, you need to be conscious of material prices. Yes, they could well go up, almost certainly, but to what extent and how's that going to affect you, and how can that be picked up at the beginning and passed on at the end? A little bit on material prices, Ian.
Well, I was just sort of picking up on your point actually about so we're talking about development. There was some stuff being reported about landlords and how they might be able to help with the impending refugee influx that we're likely to get. I know obviously off to a little bit of a shaky start, if you believe what's in the press with regards to the number of refugees that are going to be coming in from Ukraine. I gather that today they announced that there's likely to be, I think it's 100,000 coming across, and a lot of the landlord organisations, NOLA and so on, have been engaged with the government to see how landlords that have available property are able to kind of help and take some of the refugees that are obviously going to be coming in over the next few days, weeks, and months. So certainly a lot of activity going on in that quarter with the national landlord associations. I did get a question which I've now temporarily lost, which is there it is, from Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte. You mentioned disruptive markets are good for developers. Can you run through that again? I think I missed some of what you said. Thank you. Okay, so with regards to kind of disruptive markets generally, Charlotte, it would basically you've got a situation where things are changing. Whenever there's a change, some people sit on their hands, some people stay still, others look for the opportunity and look to kind of take advantage of it. So normally when things are on a kind of even keel status quo, then there's obviously less opportunity for that to happen. Soon as you get some disruption, then it kind of everybody gets a little bit polarized. A lot of people want to wait for things to kind of settle back down again. They feel much more comfortable not taking action. It's then when you've got that opportunity potentially to look at where the opportunities might be and therefore get an advantage. So there's definitely risk involved in that, but equally, if you look back through history, in lots of industries, and certainly not just property, where we're taking that course of action has paid dividends. I think it was Warren Buffett who said, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. In other words, potentially do the opposite of what the masses are doing, and that's where the biggest opportunities are. I think there's the biggest risk there as well, but equally, if you're able to kind of control that risk, then there's going to be some opportunities out there. So I think that's kind of why disruptive markets can be good, frankly, for anybody in business, whatever industry you're in, but development no exception. Charlotte, I hope that helps.
Okay. Just a couple of statements. Jenny said there's always someone worse off than you are, Jenny Roman. Absolutely. There really is. But of course, if you're the one that's struggling, and I totally get that there's going to be people in this country that are struggling to pay their bills, you have struggled to look beyond your own walls when you're struggling, and I totally get that. Another interesting comment. So Jenny Roman, thank you for that comment. And certainly that's something we talk about at home a fair bit. Is we're moaning about something, and it's nothing, is it? It's nothing. Yvette says, and this is an interesting little comment as well. Better to develop properties that require less energy due to superior insulation, better for occupants and end users. If this is going to be, which is quite likely to be quite a long-term issue in not buying a lot of gas off of Russia, that's probably going to be a fairly step change. But we have to change anyway in terms of energy use. So maybe this is a thing that pushes us forward to find alternatives. So a nice comment. I like it. Okay, Jamie, this is quite a long one. So let me see what Jamie says. Let's have a look. Jamie, you must have been typing for ages doing this. Jamie says, thank you, gents, for very straightforward and honest opinions tonight on the terrible things happening. I think you are right. There is always something going on in the world, and you definitely need to have your own house in order at times like these. I have a good portfolio. I hope there's a question at the end of this, or this is a big statement. I have a good portfolio which I live off, but I do like the idea of generating some large cash sums for emergency use in difficult times. My question. My question is, realistically, what could I make as a new developer out of my first project, and how much risk is there? About 10 quid and loads of risk, Jamie. But anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Jamie, okay, in terms of how much could you make out your first development, when we're talking about not flipping houses, we're talking about property development. We're talking about generally probably six figures and above, above that. I mean, but a good healthy six figures, minimum of probably 100,000 to really make it worthwhile. I would say 150, 200,000 is a great starting point, Jamie, for your first project. That's the sort of number you would aim at. A lot of our students will be around the 200 out of their first project. Okay, that's the target number. You might, in terms of risk, whether you ultimately end up with the whole 200 in your pocket, or whether it's going to come down a bit because some of the stuff we've talked about tonight about material prices and things that could come through for all sorts of reasons. Just fuel prices will push up material prices, of course it will, because of manufacture and so on. But in terms of risk, Jamie, there are lots of people that might tell you, oh, go for development, rah rah rah, it's great, you're going to earn a fortune, you're going to make millions of pounds. Yeah, you could, but is it risky? Yes, it is risky. Okay, in terms of how much risk, it's difficult to quantify that and say it's this or that, because everyone's risk profile is different. And Jamie, your risk profile might be very different to mine or Ian's or other people that we've got on here this evening. So it's difficult to clarify that. The point that we would say when we teach people, we try and teach you to run a business. We talked about that earlier, a couple of questions earlier. I can't remember who that was from now, it's gone off my screen, but about running a business and about it being a business. When you know how to run a business, Jamie, then you're going to try and manage all your risks. And we talked about material prices and stress testing your deal. If you do all the things that we tell you to do in terms of when we coach people, we're pretty confident that the worst position should be, can't guarantee, okay, but it should be that you always end up as a break even at worst, okay? And I don't know of any other business that is your worst case scenario. Fingers crossed, hopefully, touch wood, and all the rest. So it's about controlling that risk. The problem for a lot of people, they go out, they think, yeah, I'm just going to give that a go, give this a go. What about that? What about that? It's complicated, okay? Development is complicated. There are many, many moving parts, but it's entirely possible, okay? And there are people that are sat just like you were, Jamie. I'm assuming that you haven't done development before. That's why you're asking this question. You've got a portfolio. Many a landlord that we've trained who's been sat there, particularly more recent months, so many landlords looking to get into small scale development is one of the biggest things. I hate the word property strategy, but if you want to talk property strategy, it's probably one of the biggest things in strategy that people are getting into in 2022. There's a huge amount of interest and demand. So Jamie, there's plenty of landlords out there just like you who have taken that plunge and going forward, and they're managing that risk. Okay, when you know what you don't know, that's the key point. And indeed, for anyone else that's listening, and I know you're not all into property, there are many people that we've trained who've never done property at all, don't have any buy-to-lets, don't have any HMOs or service departments, unrelated backgrounds, completely unrelated, and come into this and they're developing property and earning some significant, that was easy to say, six-figure sums. Jamie, hopefully that answers your question. Ian, have we got time for one more quick one? I know we're about 1:45, but can we squeeze one more sort of nice property question?
A lovely comment here from Monica, who says, George, well said, George. Take considered action when others will not. You have perked up my thinking tonight. Thank you. So there we go, George. Thanks from Monica. And
what about us, Monica? What about us? Just give George credit.
It was all George. It was all George. And there was a question here from Rob. Good evening, Rob. What's your thoughts on doing a project with less profit than 20%, but still with a good number, i.e., above 250,000? Okay. So the challenge with kind of focusing on the number, Rob, is that it's about managing risk. So best example is if you were going to build a massive housing estate that's hundreds and hundreds of millions, and you were still thinking, but you know what, I'd be quite happy with 250 grand. Frankly, a little sort of increase in the price of bricks might well eat away your margin. So sticking at a percentage is the way to go, and 20% is of gross development value is the kind of target number. It's not a target number that's specifically laid down by us. Typically what will happen when you talk to your commercial lenders, they'll insist on you targeting that sort of level of return, because obviously they want to make sure that you keep the shirt on your back, and if you've got that level of margin built in, then if there is a bump in the road, you can normally absorb it. You might not make your full 20%, but at least you'll still end up making money, won't end up making a loss. So that's why it's done as 20% rather than a fixed number, even though some of those fixed numbers might be quite attractive to you as a profit figure. Hope that helps.
Yeah, Rob, you need to be talking to Monica, because she actually said earlier as well, I think that was good advice to build in higher than 20% in uncertain times. So Rob, listen to Monica. Folks, that's all we've got time for tonight. I did notice, Rosemary, I hear you lost sound earlier. Well, I didn't hear, I see it. How can I hear you? That's writing. I read that you lost sound earlier, Rosemary. And I see quite a few people joined us quite late on in the show. If you want to listen to the whole show, then pop onto YouTube next week. It will be downloaded, uploaded onto YouTube. Just go onto YouTube, propertyCEO. You can listen to all the back issues of propertyCEO Open Door. Lots of content on there. But if you've missed a bit of this evening, go back and have a listen. It should be up by Monday. You can have a listen to that. Please, as always, pop in the chat box if you've enjoyed tonight's show. I know it was a very difficult subject. We normally try and be really upbeat, have a bit of a laugh, try and do a little bit with you guys this evening. We can't belittle what's going on in the world, and unfortunately we all get a dose of the news for every day. If you're religious, then please pray for them. If you're not, please just pray for them. You know, for the poor people in Ukraine, hopefully it'll come good. And indeed, you know, for a lot of the Russian people as well, there's a lot of people suffering all around the world, and I think it'll take some time to put things right. But let's hope, you know, something sensible prevails, and maybe out of it something good will come. Who knows? But thanks for joining us. Next week we are back. We're going to have Colin Smith on from CJS Planning. So we'll have a bit of a laugh then. We'll be super upbeat. We'll be back to our normal selves, and it will be non-stop fun in 45 minutes. And then talking about making money, getting paid to develop property will be the week after that, all being, we'll just check the diaries, but that should be the week after that. So if you want to tune in on that, you are more than welcome. Anyway, we've enjoyed it tonight. I mean, it's a tricky subject, but I think it's been an interesting one and very interesting questions. Been enjoyable again, isn't it, Ian?
It has. Yeah, thanks for your questions, and do get your questions in about planning to us for next week, because I know that Colin will have a lot to say.
Good stuff. Okay, who says what in the chat box? Jenny says, you guys are always fabulous. I would pick you up, smiley face. Jenny, thanks for that. That's absolutely fantastic. Vicky says, thanks so much, as always, chaps. Very empathetic and lots of gems to take away, as always, much appreciated. Let's have a look what else is. Derek says, thank you, Ian and Richie. Good to see you again. Top performance as always, thought-provoking and informative. We like that, absolutely. Thanks again, appreciated, Monica. Rosemary says, thanks. Dan says, great show, guys. Thanks, with a little praying hands. That's terrific. Thank you very much. Yoko says, thank you so much again. Me, good to be back. Looking forward to next one. Absolutely. Thank you both, says Patrick. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Interesting subject, interesting debate this evening. Let's hope and pray for everyone else out there. See you next week. See you soon now. Bye-bye.